So when last we talked, we left off talking about the idea in the Byzantine Empire that the emperor, in this case, we've got an image of Justinian, who is front and center, obviously ahead of his military and ahead of his political bureaucracy, but also front and center ahead of his church. And we even see him there with the halo. So this notion of Caesaropapism in the Byzantine Empire, the religious and the political rolled into one leader, is obviously important. This leads to a great centralization of the Byzantine Empire, not only of the state, but also of the religion in Eastern Europe, where the emperor is the guy that's appointing all of the religious leaders, like bishops and such. And also the emperor can pass down religious law. Now, we talked about the Byzantine Empire being quite large. And remember, even if it's only controlling this much, that's still a really big empire, especially in this time that we're talking about. Byzantine Empire is quite large. Most subjects of the Byzantine Empire aren't having much to do with the central authority on a day-to-day basis. All right? They pay their taxes. The central authority collects the taxes. The central authority makes sure there are no revolts and makes sure that they might suppress any uprisings that could come along. To do this, the Byzantine Empire creates one of the most elaborate bureaucratic systems in the post-classical world. So, like other civilizations, like other big empires, they employ a bureaucracy, a bureaucratic system. The Byzantine Empire is extremely complex. In fact, today, in our language today, we use the word Byzantine as an adjective to describe some system that is like overly complex and difficult and complicated. All right? Like as you guys are navigating the IB's requirements, especially over the next year when you're going to get into all the CAS and hear about all the exams and the IAs and the EEs and all the rest. And the external assessments, EAs, whatever, all those acronyms. You might say the organization of the IB is quite Byzantine in nature. It's complex. All right? So they employ an elaborate bureaucracy that carries out the rule of the central order. Like we saw in China, in Han China, most of the bureaucracy comes from an aristocratic class. But there will be some recruits from all social classes. So we get this idea in the Byzantine Empire that there is some level of social mobility. And the bureaucracy is going to not only carry out political authority of the emperor, but also regulate trade and prices and things like that throughout the empire. And now, religion. Trade and prices within the empire. Religion in the Byzantine Empire, and this is important to talk about when we talk about the politics, because in the Byzantine Empire, we've got politics and religion very much intertwined with each other, right? Caesaropapism. Here we want to draw a distinction from Western Catholicism, all right? The Western Catholic Church. Now, the idea of having two churches was a pretty early thing within Christianity. And in fact, there were 5 early centers of Christianity, all right, in Christianity's first few centuries. Rome was, of course, one of them. Constantinople would be one. Yes, sir? Alexandria in Egypt, of course. Antioch is one. And I am having a brain fart on the last. But it's inconsequential. Because what's going to happen to the Christian world, from the 7th century on? When you hear 7th century in AP history, you've got to think of the biggest event that happens inside the 7th century. The development of Islam. So what happens to much of the Christian world in the 7th century? Let's go back to this map. Remember this, oh yeah, here we go, my bad. Alexandria, Jerusalem, I forgot Jerusalem. Alexandria, Jerusalem, Antioch, Constantinople, and Rome were 5 centers of Christianity. And they each had a religious leader within one of those 5. The Pope at that time was not like the number 1. He was one of 5. But what happens to Alexandria and Jerusalem and Antioch? They're conquered by Islam. They're overrun by the Islamic caliphates within the first decades of the expansion of Islam. So they're gone. This now becomes Muslim, that becomes Muslim, that becomes Muslim. So now you're left, after the 7th century, you're left with 2 centers of Christianity. You're left with Rome and Constantinople. And I hope you guys can see, like, where do you think there would be, I'm asking you guys for your own personal question, where do you think there would be more sibling rivalry? In a family with 4 or 5 siblings, or in a family with 2 siblings?
2. 4 or 5.
See, why would you say 4 or 5? I'm thinking 2 myself, like a majority of you guys. Why would you think that? There's more people to have rivalries with? Sure. Mina?
But at the same time, when you have 4 or 5, you kind of have to share. But when you only have 2, you can kind of just get rid of the
Yeah, like no one of 5 can like assert absolute dominance, right? But 1 of 2 might be able to. Maybe you can in a family. This might be a horrible analogy. Yeah.
I am a twin.
You are a twin.
I have only 1 sibling. My brother and I fight like cat and dog.
Okay.
That's how
It's worse.
So by your personal example, we have decided that Brandon is absolutely wrong. Right? So what we see, okay, but you're the outlier, right? So what we see here, all right, what we see here, when there are 5 centers of Christianity, none of those 5 centers asserts absolute dominance over any others. When we are down to just 2, they are each jockeying for control. They're each jockeying. The Roman Pope wants to lead over the Eastern Church. The Eastern Patriarch sees himself as a true leader. So we get this division now. Once we are down to the 2, we get this division for who's got the control. All right? In the Western Church, and we'll talk more about Western Europe in our next class. In the Western Church, we have papal authority, right? The Pope. And guys, this word Pope, where does it derive from? Papal, Pope?
Pope, paper.
No, is it like a father? Father. And in the Eastern Church, we're going to call those guys patriarchs. The word patriarch means father, all right? So they're kind of the same thing. But remember the kind of political system now after the year 453, right? 457? 476. 476. I'm mixing my years up. I'm having a bad day. After the year 476, when Rome falls for the last time, what is the political authority in Rome? There is none, right? They were conquered by outsiders. But the Pope is still there. So the Pope in Rome after 476 doesn't have to answer to any political authority. Yet here, Constantinople never falls. Or not until 1453 at least. Constantinople doesn't fall. So that emperor in the East can still have authority over the church. So if you wonder, why do we have this difference between Eastern and Western churches where one has a political leader in charge and one has the religious leader in charge? Because the West lost their political authority when Rome falls. The East never loses their political authority. All right? So we get 2 distinct religions growing up. So in the East, Caesaropapism, the emperor appoints the patriarch of the Eastern Church. This gives the Byzantine Empire and the Byzantine emperor, it gives him what we call legitimacy. People can accept that he is the legitimate ruler because they see him as not only the leader of a state, but also as the leader of the faith that they practice. All right? So we better not step out of line with our ruler, because then we might be stepping out of line with our God. All right? They don't see the ruler as God, but they see him as like an emissary on earth of God. Yes?
So are there laws then based off of like religion?
Absolutely. In the Byzantine, absolutely. All right. We will eventually have like a clear split with the West. There are always similarities. Just like we talked about Islam and Sunni and Shia Islam, Eastern and Western Christianity have some very important similarities. Number one, both believe in one God, and both believe that Jesus is the Son of God and came to earth and died and rose and is seated at the right hand of the Father. They both accept that. All right? Like the most important aspects of Christianity. They accept the same Bible. They do the same sacraments. Baptism and marriage and such. They have a very similar church hierarchy, like from the patriarch on down to local authorities. They're each equally intolerant of other religions. So there's some similarities going on here. But then there's a number of differences, and these differences will grow over time. And let me just throw out a handful of differences. Language. The Roman Catholic Church used the language of Rome, which was Latin. And in fact, the Roman Catholic Church used Latin as its language until when? Anybody know?
The Reformation.
Long after that. Not until the 1960s. In the 1960s, there was a major new reformation of the Roman Catholic Church, where the church said it's now okay to perform masses anywhere in the world in the language of those people. So before that, like if you're Catholic and your grandparents grew up in our area, they were hearing Latin masses. They were hearing the masses in Latin. And the Eastern Church, what's their language? Greek. Yes, sir.
So now do they in Eastern Orthodoxy or all Mass still in Greek?
No, because we've had such like in Greek Orthodox churches, yes. But now there's like in Russian Orthodox churches, the language would be Russian. So there's been a lot of breakup over time of even the Orthodox churches. We've got some doctrinal differences, some belief differences. I'm not going to get into the weeds of these differences, but like interpretations of Mary and things like this. There are some actual theological, doctrinal differences. There's differences in the belief of the use of icons, like religious icons that represent Jesus and Mary and things like this. Whereas the Eastern Church would eventually move against the use of religious icons in their churches. There's differences in the bread that Christians consume. In Christian mass, in Catholic masses, in Eastern Orthodox masses, there is what is known as communion, where the practitioners consume bread that is believed by the practitioners to be the body of Christ. In the Western Church, they use unleavened bread. It seems like a trivial thing, but they use unleavened bread. So those of you that are Catholics, you've experienced the little bread wafers that you consume. And in the Eastern Church, they use leavened bread. It rises, and so it's actually like a clump of bread, and it's just a practice difference. But it's another one of those differences. Beards, shaving. Western churches, the priest shaved, the pope shaved. All right, you don't see hairy popes. In the Eastern churches, those dudes are hairy. Those guys have long beards. All right, in fact, let me see if I got it here. There we go. So now this is not the current. That's Pope Benedict. He's going back one, and an Eastern patriarch. I don't know his name. But the biggest, and I'm going to close here, and then we'll go to lunch. The biggest difference in the Eastern Church and the Western Church is who has ultimate authority. In the West, the Pope has ultimate spiritual authority. In the East, the Emperor has ultimate religious authority because he chooses the patriarch. And you can see, why would the Pope not give that up? Why would the Pope ever give that system up? No reason to. It works for him. And nor would the Eastern Church ever give their system up. This is the biggest split. Yes?
I thought you said there's
Papism in the East.
So is the patriarch also the king? Or
No. The emperor is the guy that chooses the patriarch. So, yeah. Because the emperor's got bigger fish to fry than just worrying about religion 24/7.
Roman Catholicism is the other way around?
So in Roman Catholic history, we tend to see the popes crowning the kings. In the Eastern, we see the kings crowning the popes, essentially, the patriarchs. Close with this. These divisions would grow over centuries, all right? By the year 1054, it came to a head in an event known in Christendom, the Christian world, as the Great Schism. S-C-H-I-S-M. The Great Schism. A schism is like a big break. And in 1054, all of these differences come to a head, and the Roman Catholic Pope excommunicates all the Eastern Catholic, or the Eastern Orthodox Patriarch. He kicks them out of the religion, because he sees his religion as the true one. And because anything you can do, I can do better, the Eastern Patriarch kicks the Roman Catholic Church out of his faith. They each excommunicate each other. So officially in 1054, we will now say we have two Christianities. An Eastern Orthodox Christianity of the Byzantine Empire and a Roman Catholic Church of Western Europe.